Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we are continuing the B-side stories.
B-side.
Yeah. And we're talking about Cousin Mordecai.
Oh, good old Cousin Mordecai.
Yes. So if you've been following along, you already know that these are stories that are less popular in the Bible, right? Because people sometimes don't talk about them that much, but we are here to talk about them.
They kind of get outshined by others, which doesn't make them less. It's just how it works.
Exactly. So we're here to talk about them. Yeah. So this week we're talking about a man named Mordecai, and we have a thing for biblical men with difficult names that we can't pronounce. This one's not as hard as like all the Hebrew boys and stuff.
Right. But we did do Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth, yes. So this is Mordecai.
So this is Mordecai.
Exactly.
A little less difficult, but kind of up there still.
Yes. So warning, please. We are specifically going to talk about Mordecai's story and his role in the Esther story, right? So he is a part of a bigger story, but we're specifically going to talk about him. So if we don't mention Esther at all, that's why. And if you're an Esther fan, we did an episode on her already.
We love Esther.
Exactly. She's
we have
amazing.
talked about her.
Yes. Please refer to episode 49. It's called Judge, Prophetess, and Queen from the She Is series. Yes, so go over there to talk about Esther.
Here's about
and I'm telling you this because this might be a long episode and I don't want you to feel tricked.
Yeah. We want you to know about Esther too, so.
Exactly. Go but hey, finish this one and then go listen to the other one.
Yeah, it just builds.
Yeah, it'll put it all together for you. So, all right, on to the cousin. So, Mordecai is the cousin of Queen Esther, the only Esther in the Bible, who also has her own book that depicts her amazing story from average girl to queen. It's very pageanty. It's very great.
Yeah, it starts very pageanty, and then it gets real serious and cool and all that. So
yes, yeah.
Again, we are fans.
I'm just like, I'm literally thinking about it. I was like, man, it is a cool story.
Yeah.
Even make a cool movie. Somebody has probably made a movie. But anyway,
you know what? A fun fact.
What?
I learned about Esther. Not that I didn't know what Esther was, but like I learned more of her story in this Cousin Mordecai through a show called VeggieTales, which is very popular, like Christian. If you grew up Christian, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily grow up with them, but like my sisters were young enough to watch that, and so I remember watching this episode about her. I'm like, this is a great way to tell her story. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look it up on YouTube.
Yes.
I'm sure they have the episode on there or something, but it's very interesting, like kids cartoon.
Yeah, and if you have kids, show them the VeggieTales.
Show them that. It's fun.
Yeah. So here we go. So Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin. He becomes Esther's guardian because she doesn't have either of her parents. We read in Esther 2, verses 5 through 6, that his great-grandfather was taken captive and exiled to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Good old King Neb.
Yeah.
And that definitely sounds familiar if you listen to last episode. Mm-hmm. So the Bible says, again, Esther 2, 5 through 6, and all in the NLT as always. Mm-hmm. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, or Jair, maybe, don't know. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. So to get a little teachy, we talked about Daniel and his homies last week, and based on the time of exile, Mordecai's great-grandfather would have also been exiled with Daniel around 597 BC. So that's interesting.
So kind of the same, around the same time. I don't know if with them, obviously, because we talked about there was a few different
like the
types.
3 waves of exiles.
But it's kind of cool that to kind of give it a little bit of perspective and kind of like where Esther and Mordecai land.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because although we had planned to talk about Mordecai, we didn't plan to go in this order, but it works. And it's like, thank you, Holy Spirit. We did not plan that, but hey, thank you.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, hey, look at that.
Hey, look at us. We seem smart. Like we planned it. Thank you. Yes, all the glory goes to God. So as we are introduced to Mordecai, we learn that he has a cousin, Hadassah, also called Esther. If you continue reading this chapter, you will learn that Mordecai worked at the palace gate. As he's working, he hears 2 men plotting to kill the king. So Mordecai is like, not on my watch.
Right.
No.
I just picture him sassy for some reason. Like,
no. All the stuff that he does here, I feel like there's a lot of like hand on the hip motions and stuff.
And or like very like attitude, like, no, I don't think so.
Exactly. So he hears these guys, right? So he goes to tell his cousin Esther, who is now the queen, and she gets the message to her husband, King Xerxes. So the king's people fact check and they confirm that it's true. Mordecai gets the credit for saving the king's life by them writing it down. And Esther 2 verse 23 says, when an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the 2 men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. So like it was documented because, the Bible refers to all these other books that were written at that time, which are basically historical documents. So it was written on that book, and the guys died on a pole.
That was,
And that's going to come back around. So just continue. Yeah.
Hold that whole impaling is it'll come up.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So time goes on, and the king promotes a man named Haman. He's the most powerful official, and as such, all other officials must bow down to him. It's actually commanded by the king, right? Because this guy had so much power. So as you might guess, Mordecai will not bow to Haman. The other officials tell on him to Haman, like, hey, there's this one guy, and he's not bowing down to you.
He's not following the law.
Go do something about it. So now remember that Mordecai is a Jewish man in exile, so he's not like at home in Jerusalem, right?
Right.
He's in a foreign land under Babylon's rule, but he wasn't shy about who he was or the God he believed in, and he didn't try to fit in or hide his true self. So Haman took advantage of this and was so angry with Mordecai for not bowing to him that he wanted to punish not just Mordecai, but all the Jews, which sounds a bit rash.
Yeah.
But when you have that much power and you're using it for evil, then I guess these are the type of thoughts you have.
And that's how angry he was. That he's like,
not
just you, all you.
Exactly.
Like,
all y'all.
All y'all. Yeah. We got real Texas.
Exactly. So Esther 2:23 says, he had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So Haman does address the king and proposes that since, quote, a certain race of people don't obey the law of the king, they should die, right? And this is in Esther 3:8. So Haman comes up to the king. He's like, hey, I think we should kill all these people.
Yeah.
And the king, for some reason, is like, okay, that's a good idea.
And again, because he had the power and he's like, I'm king. They should be like bowing to me and like doing other stuff. So yeah, okay, I agree.
Yeah, because those high officials typically, right, they're representatives of the king, right?
Yes.
So kind of if they don't honor you, they're kind of, and Haman probably manipulated the crap out of that.
Yeah.
And the king says yes. Yeah. So as you can imagine, there is devastation among the Jews because now they're going to die, or they think they're going to die.
Right.
So Esther 4:1-3 says, when Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all of the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. So they're in mourning, of course, because of what they just found out that's going to happen. So Mordecai, he's like, I'm going to do something about it. Right? Sassy Mordecai.
Yeah, there he goes.
So he sets out to get help from his cousin, Queen Esther. So he encounters one of the queen's assistants, and Mordecai sends him back with the news of the decree, right? He's like, hey, let her know what's going on.
Yeah.
Which is cool because we don't find out until later that she didn't know what was happening. But Mordecai knew that she didn't know what was happening, right?
Which
is interesting.
In case you don't know, because she was a queen, like, yes, she was in the palace, but I think there was a lot of sheltering, right?
Like she wasn't involved in all the political things. Right.
And so he's like, no, she needs to know what's going on, especially because he knew, like, hey, you're one of us, and you need to know because this can affect you too. So,
exactly.
Basically.
So we're in Esther 4:7-9. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Now we jumped into a conversation between Esther and Mordecai. So just imagine that they're texting each other because it'll be more fun. So Esther 4:10-17 says, then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. So the guy got there. He's like, hey, this is what Mordecai says. And now she goes, okay, tell him this. Verse 10. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner circle without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. So here's Mordecai's reply. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Oh, yeah, it's so good.
It's so good.
All this texting back and forth.
Yeah, I can just imagine like texting or like emailing, like instant messaging.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do you see my message?
Yeah.
Well, do you understand the situation I'm in? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you understand you're our only help?
Do you understand that I could die?
I could die. Yeah. Well, you can die too. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Because it's funny, like two things that the best verse in here, right? Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? That's amazing, right? That's a highlight of the Book of Esther.
Yeah.
The other thing is that he says, "But you and your relatives will die," right? Mordecai tells that to Esther. He is her relative.
Right.
So he's like, yo.
He's like, hello, we about to die.
I want you to know that you about to die and your relatives, which is me. I'm the only one.
Me.
I don't want to die. So I'm going to need you to do something.
Yeah, like help me, help you. Let's help each other out. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. It's so good.
He really drove that message home.
Yeah. Exactly. And spoke of himself in third person.
Just such a Mordecai thing. Again, I just love it. Yeah. So we know this part is just really awesome because it really shows us the vision that Mordecai had because he was a man of God, right? Mm-hmm. He knew that she wasn't queen just for the sake of being queen, just for the sake of a situation like this where she, it was for a situation where she could save everyone. He was thinking, I know this may be dangerous for you, but think about everyone else. Like this is, it's not just a coincidence that you've made queen.
Yeah, and we have to keep in context the fact that they are in exile, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a man who's older than her, right?
Yes.
They're
like
cousins,
a father
but
figure.
a father figure. So I think he can see a lot of things that she can't.
Yeah.
Right? And she's in this palace. She doesn't know the context of being a queen and being in that palace. And so, I don't know, I feel like he has some sort of insight that she could not foresee, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think because she's in the palace, there's a lot of things that are not revealed to her or that she's allowed to do anymore because of the position that she's in now. And so Mordecai's kind of that, voice of truth and the voice of like reality and letting her know like what's actually happened out in the real world.
Right.
And so she has that to know, you know, and to know what to do next. So we're going to fast forward now to Esther 5. Esther does her thing and prepares a banquet, and then we find Haman and Mordecai having a face-off, basically, right? So we read in Esther 5, verse 9 and 10, it says, Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet, but when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home.
This is a funny picture.
Yeah.
Like
the very like the Arthur clenched hand kind of thing. Like, oh, I'm so mad at you right now for not doing
Mordecai's
what the
just sitting there. Like, I know Mordecai looked over. He was talking to a friend, right?
Yeah,
and he looks over and he sees Haman, and he's like, anyway, and then he just keeps talking.
He did not say anything to him, but they made eye contact. Yes. Like, that's how I see it.
Yes, and Haman's like, how dare you?
Yeah.
If only I had a pole.
If only I could do something. So Haman goes home. He's really pumped about the banquet that he got invited to, but he can't fully enjoy his quote unquote win because of Mordecai, what just happened, right?
Which is crazy, right? That he's putting so much weight on Mordecai because he literally just had a banquet with the king.
Yes.
And now he's just mad
about
this.
And the position that he's in, right?
Exactly.
Like he's the most powerful next to the king, basically. And yet he's letting Mordecai kind of like invade his life, so like all these things that he's like,
he just ruined his whole day.
I can't believe you ruined my life right now.
Yeah.
Like, my whole day, I had all these things and now like you ruined my moment. Yeah. And it's like Mordecai was just sitting there.
Yeah, literally trying to play dominoes or something.
Like just trying to have a conversation with his buddy or something. Okay, so we continue and we see in verse 13, it says, then he added, again, talking about Haman, but this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate. Again, he's just like pissed, right? He's
his existence bothers me.
He's like, I can't believe he's just standing there.
He's not trembling or anything. He needs to fear me.
So then we find out that Haman's crew comes up with a terrible idea that we see in the very next verse. It says, so Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all his friends suggest set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall, and in the morning, ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king. This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up.
Yeah.
Remember, we talked about this
The
pole
came
coming
back around.
back. Yeah.
And they said specifically
Yeah.
75.
So they just wanted to make sure that he really got impaled, like he fell on this pole. He's really mad at him. He just wanted to hurt him, right?
Yeah, and I don't know much about pole impaling, but I feel like if you impale a human, doesn't matter how big the pole is, they're gonna lose some intestines or something.
Yeah, that's gonna hurt. I don't think they're gonna survive that. Yeah. Exactly.
Especially in 590 something BC.
Yeah, like there are no doctors or hospitals that have the technology we have today that could maybe help them.
Yes, that's a whole tangent.
This is
but
just
we
like
have questions.
Yeah, this is just beyond. But yeah, so we see Haman here, and he's like, "Cool, dope. That's an awesome idea. Let's just put up these orders and like put up this pole, right? Let's do it." So all of a sudden, Mordecai gets elevated in an amazing way. This is how God works, right? Yeah. So Haman's like plotting this whole thing, and he's like, "I'm going to build this thing," and all of a sudden, this happens. So we see in Esther 6, verses 6 through 13. That night, the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign, so it could be read to him. Bedtime story.
He's like, "Read me my story as a bedtime story."
I cannot sleep. Please bring me my story.
Talk to me about myself.
Yeah, tell me about me being king. So in those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. "What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this?" the king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." So they hadn't acknowledged him. They had just made the record, right?
Yeah.
Nothing had been done. So verse 4 says, "Who is that in the outer court?" the king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared.
Yeah, I just want to say that, just a side note.
Yeah.
So King Xerxes can't sleep, right? Mm-hmm. So Haman went home. Now I'm just imagining it's like the middle of the night, and Haman came back because he's like, this cannot wait.
Yes,
right?
Yes. I need to let him know so we can get this over
exactly.
with.
Why he thought
he probably couldn't sleep either. He was just so mad at Mordecai for existing that he's like, I need to tell the king.
Yeah, why he thought he was gonna like wake up the king at whatever time it was, like, I don't know, but
why he thought it was okay or he could, but that was, I guess, part of his position that he could do that. But yeah, we can see that he also couldn't sleep and just wanted to get this over with. So the attendants replied to the king, "Haman is out in the court." And so it says, "Bring him in," the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Again, not mentioning Mordecai, just asking his second guy here, the most powerful guy. And of course, as he is, Haman thought to himself, right? Because he's thinking about himself. "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied. So he was thinking this. And so he answered the king, thinking it was him. "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with a royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, 'This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor.'" Right? So this elaborate parade, basically, right? To honor this man. And so the king's like, "Excellent," he told them.
"Excellent.
Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested." Like, follow this to the T.
Exactly.
That was such a good idea.
Oh, man, the blow.
So here is his, like, fatal enemy, basically.
Yeah.
And now he has to do all these things that he thought were going to be for himself.
Yeah. Oh, the pride.
So, wow. Talk about knocking him down,
A couple notches.
A couple notches, for sure. So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square, shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. That must have been very hard for him.
Yes.
So when Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him."
See, someone saw the light.
Yeah.
They're like, "Hey, I don't think you need to stop.
You need to stop
that was
messing with
embarrassing."
this man.
Yeah.
This is probably the worst that could have happened to you. And based on who Mordecai is, you're not gonna like get what you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was just a very difficult situation, I'm sure, for Haman, and just really humbled him. To see that what he thought was going to be for him ended up being for Mordecai.
Yeah, and I don't think it humbled him. I think it just made him mad. I think it pissed him off.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's true.
It literally fueled the fire.
But when we talk about God preparing a table before your enemies, right? Like we hear that in Psalms. So this is just incredible that the man that's been wanting to basically end Mordecai, kill him, is then now the one who has to place him on the horse, give him the robe, and do all these stuff. And let's not forget, he had to go before Mordecai and shout, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." He didn't just have to do the thing, like he had to actually
like
speak.
Lead the horse and be like, "Hear ye, hear ye."
Yeah, exactly. Like not just be like, okay, give him that. He had to be leading.
Yeah.
And basically sharing what the king had said. So it's
Table,
crazy.
Enemies, me.
Yes.
In this case, it was a horse.
Yeah, there was a horse and a robe and the whole thing. But yeah, so it's crazy. It's what happens when you focus on God, right? Do what he tells you to do and just leave the judgment up to God.
Right.
Like Haman was trying to do that himself. And clearly God's like, that's not my plan.
Yeah.
And he ended up honoring another man and you know, taking on basically what needed to happen versus what Haman and his selfishness wanted to happen.
Yeah, and this is what happens, like, there's many times that we have been Haman, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
Haman is the person that does everything out of his own strength. Now, that works for a while, right?
Yes,
he got elevated, he got invited to this banquet, like, things were going good for Haman, but his heart, right? And his intentions behind everything. And so on the other side, we see Mordecai, who is just, like, trying to save his people. He's trying to survive in exile. And he raised this cousin and all of these things, right? And he, from what we see, he's a God-honoring man,
right.
From what we know of him. And then he does nothing other than like, I'm not bowing down to you because I know who the true God is.
And he didn't do things like because he wanted to be noticed by the king. Right. He's like, I know these things are the right thing to do.
Exactly.
And I need to honor the king.
Posture, right? Exactly. So Mordecai's heart posture versus Haman's heart posture. And then he just gets elevated for doing what he thought was just right.
And again, like we see God's timing as well, right?
Exactly. Because there was a delay when he got,
because normally a king would recognize, you know, hey, thanks for saving my life or whatever it is that the person did. And in this case, they recognize him, but they just wrote it down at the time. Yeah. And then how God orchestrated all this to be like, you know what?
It's not time yet.
Someone wants to hurt you, but I'm going to wait till the right time. Yeah. So you are actually honored instead. So it's just a beautiful picture of just, what God does.
Yeah, God's timing.
In that situation. So.
Yeah, God's not slow. We're just impatient.
Yeah. We're just impatient. Yes. Yeah. So something teachy, also something very cool about this is that the robe in the Bible sometimes refers to identity. So Haman essentially placed the robe identity that he wanted on Mordecai. Mordecai was obviously doing things the right way, and Haman was conniving, manipulating, proud, power hungry, and a lot of other things like that.
So the identity that Haman wanted, he had to place on somebody else.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And he wanted to take that for himself, and it ended up where he had to put it on Mordecai. Oh, man. So long story short, Mordecai does get elevated, right? Haman gets killed, and then the Jews are saved. Yay! So kind of like summary of the story, if you will. Yeah. And we do see this in Esther chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. On that same day, King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off the signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Yeah. So he elevated now Mordecai just for being the man that he was, for honoring God and honoring the king. And now he was placed in a position that then Haman had. Right?
Yeah, and it was cool because something I didn't notice was that Esther was the one that gave Mordecai all of Haman's stuff, like all of his property. Yeah. So she kind of comes back in the story and be like, oh, I'm going to give it to my cousin.
Yeah. Like, oh, him? Yeah, and I'm going to give him this. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to fast forward to Esther, same chapter, but verse 15 through 17. It says, Then Mordecai left the king's presence, wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. And the people of Susa celebrated the new decree. The Jews were filled with joy and gladness and were honored everywhere. In every province and city, wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So, yes, who is Cousin Mordecai? He's definitely a star.
Yes.
This man, with the help of his cousin, of course, because he couldn't have done it without Esther being in that position as queen, but literally he saves all the Jews between them two.
Mm-hmm. In exile.
In exile,
places.
yeah,
right.
Exactly. Being the minority, not being home, understanding that there's another rule, another king. Like, so many things could have gone wrong with this story, but because they were under, honoring God, God made all this timing and made sure that they were aligned to be able to help the Jews and save them.
Yeah.
So we're not going to go into the rest of the story, of course. We kind of skipped around. We wanted to really focus on Mordecai. But if you haven't read Esther, please do. It's an amazing story. The story of, of them together. Also the other things that Esther does. Like we said, we have another episode. We kind of go into that as well. But it's a great book. And it's not too long. And it's just a beautiful story of what God does and how honoring God can bless you.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And it's cool when which I didn't think about it when we started doing this series or this episode, but like when you split up two characters from the different perspectives. You get to see the different perspectives of what one person did and what the other person did and how they had to work together.
Yes.
But I think when we read Esther, we tend to focus on her role because she was the one that really was going up and addressing the king, and she's like, man, I could die, right? So you're thinking about all her bravery and all of these things, but like Mordecai was such an intricate part. It was like, I don't do sports references, but like it was like Michael Jordan and Pippen, right? Like I feel like Mordecai was Pippen, but then Esther was Michael Jordan,
right?
It's just great. It's just great. That is the only sports reference I'll probably ever do.
It was a great one, but you used the goat, so that's good.
Exactly. So we hope you enjoyed the story. It's amazing, right? It's in the Bible that's probably to your left or to your right, so you can read it if you haven't. And a fun fact is that this is the only book in the Bible, if I'm not mistaken, that doesn't mention God. But you can see God through all of it.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've always found that very interesting. But when you read it, you just see God all over it. Because you're like, they don't have to name him, or reference him, God. But you just see the way he works through them. And it's just awesome.
Which is so cool. And I think that this book, and Mordecai specifically, this is what, we've all heard this where unbelievers are not going to read the Bible, they're going to read you, right? And in this case, we see God because we read Mordecai and we read Esther, and so we see him throughout the whole story.
And we see as like it ended how other people also became Jews because they saw this story and they saw Mordecai and Esther and how they stood up, right? And like in their faith.
Yeah, they're like, I want to do that. I want to be a part of that.
I want to be a part of this,
Exactly.
So,
which is crazy because like a chapter ago, they were about to die.
Exactly.
And now they're like, I want to be a Jew.
Yeah, I want to join y'all.
Exactly.
Which is really just amazing what, your testimony and what it says to people out in the world.
It's crazy. But we hope you enjoyed this story. And we will be back next week with another B-side story. As always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.